AITA for tearing up the divorce papers because of my wife's one secret? The manila envelope felt heavier than any case file I had ever carried in my life. And I had carried many. I had it on my lap under the steering wheel as I watched people pass by on Clark Street without really seeing them. Inside were the papers. Inside was the end of 24 years. My lawyer had given them to me less than an hour ago in his 18th floor office in a downtown Chicago building. He handed them to me with the same face a doctor gives you a diagnosis. All that is missing is your signature, Brian, he told me. Whenever you decide. I nodded as if I knew what I was doing. I had 2 free hours before going back to our house in Lincoln Park, where we had spent 24 years sleeping in the same bed without touching. 2 hours to rehearse the speech I had been repeating in the shower, in the car, in board meetings while others talked about margins and profits. 2 hours to become the man who would finally have the courage to free Susan from me, because that is what I believed that afternoon, that I was freeing her. I drove aimlessly along Lakeshore Drive, then through Lincoln Park again, until I saw a small cafe on a side street that she had mentioned a couple of times. It was called Café Grove, with faded gold letters on a green awning. Susan mentioned it once when she came back from her book club. She said they made the best cornbread in the area. I remember I was washing the dishes and just said, "That is nice," without turning around. I understand now that those kinds of responses were what was condemning me in my own mind. I parked the car, grabbed the briefcase, and went inside. It smelled of freshly ground coffee and hot butter. The walls were exposed brick. There were old books on high shelves dividing the space into small nooks, and a young woman in an apron was cleaning an espresso machine behind the counter. I ordered a black Americano and looked for the most hidden table I could find. A little corner behind a wooden bookshelf, almost against the back wall. From there I could see the rest of the cafe, but it suited me. I did not want anyone to see me. I wanted to not exist for a while. I put the briefcase on the floor next to my chair. I took out my laptop out of habit. I opened my email, pretended to review proposals from suppliers, but my eyes kept returning to the briefcase. That envelope inside felt like it was filled with lead. I imagined arriving home that night, placing it on the kitchen island, watching Susan dry her hands on the plaid cloth she always kept on her shoulder, and saying the line I had polished for weeks. You deserve someone who can give you the life you want. I am not that person anymore. It was a noble phrase. Or so I told myself. Deep down, I think it was cowardly. It was easier to leave before she asked me to. And then I heard her. First, it was the laugh, a short, soft laugh, with that little break at the end that I had known since we were dating in college, when she was studying art history and I was studying engineering. And I would make her laugh by purposely mispronouncing the strange names of painters. That laugh paralyzed me, the cup halfway to my mouth. I peeked through the gaps in the bookshelf, and there she was. Susan was sitting at a table near the large window with 3 women I recognized instantly. Linda, from the book club, wife of a famous architect, Sharon, who always talked about her trips to Europe as if they were bank errands, and Melissa, the youngest, the sharpest one. The 3 of them had glasses of white wine in the middle of the afternoon and small plates of fruit. Susan had a tea. I shrank back against my chair. For a second, I thought about getting up, leaving through the back door, avoiding the cosmic ridicule of hiding in the same cafe where my wife was chatting with her friends. But something pinned me to the chair. Call it curiosity, call it masochism, call it the last stupid hope of hearing something that would make me change my mind. And what I heard at first gave me exactly the reason I needed to sign. It was Melissa who started. She spoke loudly enough for her voice to travel through the books to my table. She said she did not understand how Susan put up with living with such a stiff man. That was the word, stiff, as if I were a piece of old furniture. Linda laughed and said something about the last dinner we had gone to at the Harringtons' house, where, according to her, I had spent the whole night looking at my phone. Sharon added that whenever she greeted me at an event, I would answer in monosyllables, as if it were a great effort to dedicate 2 full sentences to her. I felt the coffee go down my throat like acid. Every word confirmed everything I had been rehearsing for weeks. I was the problem. I was the stiff one, the absent one, the boring man a woman like Susan deserved to escape from. The envelope on the floor suddenly stopped feeling like a betrayal and started to feel like an act of justice. I was giving her what everyone around her already knew she needed. I closed my eyes and listened as they continued. Melissa said something about me never dancing at Christmas parties. Linda commented that at her niece's wedding, I had left at 11:30 at night. Sharon finished by saying that Susan deserved someone with more light, more worldliness, more things to talk about. And there I was, behind the bookshelf, mentally signing the papers with each comment. All that was left was the physical act of taking out the pen. Then, Susan spoke. And when she spoke, it was as if someone had abruptly turned off all the noise in the café. Enough, she said. Just that one word. But she said it with a tone I had not heard from her in years, a tone that made me open my eyes and sit up straight in my chair. Enough, ladies, she repeated. I have let you say these things for a long time, and I am done. There was a short silence. Linda let out a nervous laugh and said something like, "Oh, Susan, you know we only want what is best for you." Melissa tried to smooth things over. "They are just jokes. Do not be like that." But Susan did not laugh. Through the gaps in the bookshelf, I saw her place her teacup on the saucer with a careful, almost ceremonial movement, and she lifted her face. "You do not know him," she said. "None of you three know him. You have been sitting with me for years telling me what the man I live with is like, and you know nothing." I stopped breathing. "Do you know why he left your niece's wedding early, Linda?" Susan continued. "Because at 5 in the morning that morning, they called him from the plant in Rockford. A system had crashed, and 270 employees were not going to get their paychecks if he did not fix it. He was on the phone from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. He came home, showered in 15 minutes, put on his suit, and took me to your niece's wedding because he knew it was important to me. And you saw him leave at 11:30 and thought he was rude." I felt a strange warmth behind my eyes. I did not even remember telling Susan about the Rockford plant. I had mentioned it in passing that night in the car, tired, without thinking she was registering every word. "He works 60 hours a week," she continued. "Not because he loves it, not because he is a workaholic, but because he feels the weight of an entire company on his shoulders, and that if he slacks off, families will fall. Do you know what that is like? Do you know what it is like to carry that in your head every day and then arrive at a dinner in Lincoln Park, where people are fighting to see who can tell the funniest anecdote from their trip to Mykonos?" Sharon tried to interrupt, but Susan, could not he try a little harder? "No," Susan cut her off. "That is what I am telling you. He is already trying. Every time he went to one of your lunches, a birthday, a gallery opening, he was already making an effort. He would arrive without a drop of social energy because he had spent it all trying to keep the company from collapsing, and he still went. And what did he get? Pitying looks, whispers, giggles, because he did not know the guests' names. I had both hands clenched on my knees. I was shaking a little, and not from the cold. Last week, Susan went on, lowering her voice a bit, as if she were telling an intimate secret. As I was coming out of the bathroom, I just casually mentioned that my car was making a strange little noise. Just that, a little noise. The next day, without telling me, he rescheduled 2 meetings he had with people from Milwaukee. He took the car to the shop himself. He waited there for 2 hours so they would give it back to me the same day, and when I got home in the afternoon, he did not say anything. He left it in the garage with the keys on the table. I found out because the mechanic sent me a message thanking me. Behind the bookshelf, I remembered that morning perfectly. For me, it had been a small task, a practical thing. I have to solve this before it becomes a big problem. It never occurred to me to tell her about it. I never thought it counted. Now she was using it as evidence. "You see him quiet, and you think he is cold," Susan said. "I see him quiet, and I know he is collapsing from exhaustion, but he still shows up. For everything I ask, he shows up. He reads the same books I am reading. Did you know that?" "What?" Linda said, confused. "Every book the club recommends. He buys on Kindle and reads at night. He leaves me little notes in the margins of my copy. Things like, 'Look at this sentence on page 87, or this reminded me of something you said last Sunday.' He does it so that on Sunday mornings when we have breakfast together, we have something to talk about, because he knows I need that. He does it even though he gets home exhausted at 11 at night. And I have spent weeks feeling lonely because you were all convincing me that I was alone." Behind the bookshelf, I had to cover my mouth. The notes, the damn notes I wrote in pencil, feeling like a foolish teenager, thinking she probably just turned the pages without seeing them. It turns out she had seen them all of them. She had saved them like little letters I did not know I was writing to her. And there, hidden among the books in that cafe, I remembered something I had buried for months. One early morning in September, around 2 in the morning, I had found her asleep on the living room couch with one of those book club books open on her chest. I carefully took off her glasses, put a blanket over her, and before turning off the light, I wrote a tiny note on the page where she had stopped. Something about a sentence I had found beautiful that week. I did it quickly, half asleep, thinking that the next day she would not even notice the page was marked. I went to bed feeling a little ridiculous, like someone who sends a message without expecting a reply. Now, months later, hiding behind a bookshelf in Lincoln Park, I was listening to my wife describe those little notes as if they were love letters. And I understood that for years, I had been shouting in the only language I know how to speak, that of small, hidden gestures, and that she had been listening the whole time without telling me she was listening, because she does not know how to talk about these things out loud either. Melissa tried one last time. Susan, we understand you are defending him. But let us be honest, you deserve someone more expressive, someone to take you dancing, someone with more life. Susan let out a laugh, but it was not a happy laugh. It was a sad, almost angry laugh. More life? She repeated. Do you really think love is measured by who throws the most parties? I did not marry Brian because he was the life of the party. I married him because when my dad died in 2003, he was the one who stayed with me for 3 straight nights without sleeping, saying almost nothing, just putting his hand on my back every time I woke up crying. I married him because he is the kind of man that when he says he will be there, he is there. And you have spent years trying to convince me that is not enough. She paused, took a sip of tea, and put it down. And the worst part, she said, is that I was starting to believe you without realizing it. I would come home after these lunches with you and see him differently. I would see him with the eyes you lent me. I would look at him being quiet and think, how boring. I would see him tired and think, how absent. And he felt it. He felt it, and he closed himself off more, because he thought I was disappointed in him. And I was disappointed, yes, but not in him. I was disappointed in myself for letting you put a version of my husband in my head that was not mine. The cafe had fallen into a strange silence. The young woman at the counter had stopped cleaning the machine. A man at another table had lowered his newspaper. I think even the city outside had quieted down a bit. Linda, her voice now trembling, said, Susan, you are exaggerating. We are your friends. You are the people I have lunch with on Thursdays, Susan replied. There is a difference. My friend was Evelyn, but Evelyn died 6 years ago. And I, instead of looking for someone like her, I found you because you were convenient, because you lived nearby, because you were the easy path. And for 6 years, I have been letting the easy path teach me to see my husband as a problem. Sharon opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I am not going back to the book club, Susan said. I am not going to the dinner on Saturday. I am not going to your cousin's gallery opening, Linda. And it is not out of anger. It is because for the first time in months, I have just realized what has been making me sick. And it is not my marriage. It is these Thursdays. There was another long silence. Melissa grabbed her purse from the back of her chair. Linda took out her wallet and left some bills on the table without really counting them. Sharon mumbled something like, we will talk later when you are calmer. But Susan did not answer. The 3 of them stood up and walked toward the door without looking back. The little bell on the entrance rang 3 times, and I stayed there behind the bookshelf, my face wet, not knowing exactly when I had started to cry. On the other side of the bookshelf, I heard Susan sigh, a long sigh of the kind one holds in for years. Then I heard her cover her face with her hands. She did not cry loudly. She cried like people who are tired of pretending. A silent, exhausted, almost relieved cry. And there, in that chair behind the wooden bookshelf, in a small Lincoln Park cafe that she had mentioned only once and that I had been foolish enough to never join her at, I understood something that tore a hole in my chest. I had spent 3 weeks preparing the divorce papers, convinced it was an act of generosity. I thought I was sacrificing myself for her, and it turns out she had probably spent the same amount of time preparing to tell those women she was no longer going to let them poison her. We had been fighting the same battle from different trenches without knowing we were on the same side. I bent down, grabbed the briefcase, and stood up from the chair. My legs were shaking as if I were 20 years younger and about to ask her to be my girlfriend again. I walked around the bookshelf. She did not see me at first. She was looking out the window, her eyes red, a crumpled napkin in her fingers. I approached the table and stood there for a second, not knowing how to begin. Then, very slowly, I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Susan looked up. I saw her go through 3 expressions in less than 2 seconds. First, confusion, as if she did not understand what I was doing there. Then, recognition, when she realized it was me and not someone who looked like me. And then, when it clicked that I must have been there long enough to hear, pure panic flashed in her eyes. "Brian," she said in a whisper, "how long have you been here?" I put the briefcase on my lap. I took a deep breath. "Long enough," I replied. She turned pale. I saw her grip the edge of the table with both hands, as if to steady herself. I think she thought I was going to get up and run out, that I was going to get angry, that I was going to confront her for all the times she had stayed silent while her friends tore me to pieces for years. But I was not angry with her. I was angry with myself. "Susan," I said, and my voice came out strange, as if I had not used it in days. "I have to show you something." I opened the briefcase, took out the manila envelope, and placed it on the table between us, next to her empty teacup. She looked at the envelope, then at me, then back at the envelope. I did not have to tell her what it was. She knew immediately, as if she had been expecting that envelope without knowing she was expecting it. "What is that?" she asked, though she already knew. "The divorce papers," I said, and it took everything in me to say it. "I have been carrying them for almost 3 weeks. I was going to give them to you tonight when you got home from here." Her eyes filled with tears again, but she said nothing. She waited. "I convinced myself," I continued, "that you did not love me anymore. I convinced myself that every silence in the house was because you were sick of me. I convinced myself that every time you came back from these lunches, it was because you were realizing you had married the wrong man. I convinced myself that the most dignified thing I could do was disappear before you had to ask me to. And I swear, Susan, I swear on whatever you want that I was going to do it. Tonight, in the kitchen, I was going to put this envelope on the island and go to the airport hotel." She brought both hands to her mouth. "And then," I said, and I could not stop my voice anymore, "I heard what you said about me. I heard about the notes in the books, about the car, about your dad. I heard you defend me from people I was afraid of because I thought they were right about me. And I realized that I was letting them win too, without knowing them, without exchanging 3 sentences with them. I was listening to them in my head just like you were listening to them in yours." Susan reached her hand across the table and placed it on mine. It was warm. I do not know how many weeks it had been since she had touched me like that. "I do not want a divorce, Brian," she said. "I wanted a divorce from my life, not from you. But I did not know how to tell you without sounding ridiculous, without sounding like a spoiled woman complaining that her lunches in Lincoln Park exhaust her." "You do not sound ridiculous," I told her. "Yes, I do. But I do not care anymore." We were quiet for a moment. The young woman at the counter, very discreetly, brought us 2 glasses of water without anyone asking and left without a word. I think she had seen the whole scene and did not want to be a part of it. I picked up the manila envelope. I held it for a second, looking at it, thinking about everything it had represented for 3 weeks. And then, slowly, I tore it in half. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than I expected in the nearly empty café. I put the halves together and tore them again. And again. In the end, there was a small pile of manila confetti on the table, and underneath, barely legible, were pieces of our names and the date that would never exist. Susan laughed, a quiet laugh through her tears. The short laugh with the break at the end. The same laugh from college. "You are crazy," she said. "A little," I admitted. "What are we going to do now?" I thought for a second. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set behind the buildings of Lincoln Park, painting the sky that specific orange that Chicago gets in November. A DoorDash delivery guy rode by on his bike. "We are going to go home," I told her. "We are going to sit at the kitchen table, not the big dining room one. We are going to order takeout from the Italian place on the corner of Armitage, the one you like, and we are going to talk until we have nothing left to say. And tomorrow, we will start deciding which friends yes, and which friends no. Which scenes yes, and which scenes no. Which life yes, and which life no. Together, without consulting anyone else." She squeezed my hand. "And work?" she asked. "You are tired too, Brian. I see it. I have always seen it." I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I thought about my 60-hour weeks and the 270 employees at the Rockford plant and the board meetings, and I did not feel the need to act strong. "We will talk about work too," I said. "There are things I have to change. But not tonight. Tonight, I just want to go home with you. Susan nodded. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, gathered the pieces of the envelope into a small pile, and put them in her purse as if they were a memory she wanted to keep. We stood up together. I left a $50 bill on the table, much more than the cost, because I felt I owed something to the place, to that bookshelf, to that young woman who brought us water. We walked out onto the street holding hands. It had been years since we had left a place holding hands. We walked to my car, and when I opened the passenger door for her, Susan stood for a second, looking at me. "Brian," she said. "What?" "Thank you for listening." I did not know if she meant that afternoon in the café or all the years in which, without her knowing, I had been trying to listen, even if I did not always get it right. I think she meant both. That night, we ordered the takeout. We ate at the kitchen table, not the big dining room one. We talked until after 2 in the morning. We told each other things we had been holding in for 6 years. Some things hurt, but almost all of them cleansed. When we finally went to sleep, for the first time in I do not know how long, we were not careful not to touch each other. She settled her head on my shoulder and fell asleep in 2 minutes, just like when we were dating. I stayed awake a little longer, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the little pile of manila paper she had saved in her purse, thinking about how close I had come to throwing away 24 years over a misunderstanding, thinking about how I almost let 3 women to whom I had never said more than 5 words decide the end of my marriage. Outside, Chicago made its usual noises. A dog barking, a car accelerating on Clark Street, the low murmur of a city that never fully sleeps. And inside, for the first time in months, the silence between Susan and me did not feel empty. It felt like a beginning. Comment: this story really touched me deeply. I've learned that setting healthy boundaries is essential to protect our peace and our most important relationships. The small, quiet acts of love often carry far more meaning than we think. Taking responsibility for our misunderstandings can lead to genuine healing and connection. I encourage you to pause and truly appreciate the ways your partner shows up for you every day. Choosing understanding over assumption takes courage and maturity. You deserve to be seen and valued exactly as you are. Real love grows when we protect it from negative outside influences. Let's all strive to listen with an open heart and respond with kindness. A little more grace and patience can make all the difference in our lives. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.